Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke Beppu. How are you doing, my friends? Happy Halloween. Continuing with my discussion of the films of Dario Argento, today I would like to talk with you, if I may, about a very peculiar and, I mean this in a good way, odd film. Inferno. This is the film or the Blu-ray that was released by Arrow. This is Region B Blu-ray, and so this has the fully uncut presentation of the feature, which is described as being 107 minutes, and it has English and also Italian audio. And it also has an introduction by Daria Nicolodi, who plays Countess Elise. And it also has an interview with Argento himself. And also another feature regarding Daria Nicolodi, an interview by her, or of her, called Acting in Hot Water. Also, there is The Other Mother, Making the Black Cat. Director Luigi Cozzi goes behind the scenes of The Black Cat, his rarely seen, totally unofficial 1989 sequel to Inferno. There's also Inferno Q&A, and also, let's see, this Q&A is a live event featuring star Irene Miracle and composer Keith Emerson, conducted by author and critic Tim Lucas. Fantastic feature, by the way. And then we have here in the back. Now, I will speak about this film in detail, so please stop this video if you haven't seen it, lest I spoil it for you. And I don't want to spoil this or any other film because I don't think these films should be spoiled. That's, it's part of the fun is watching these films and not knowing what's going to happen next. So I urge you, please, to stop the video and just come back anytime when you have seen the film. I will still be here, and I'd love to discuss the film with you when you have a chance. Okay, so Inferno, 1980, Dario Argento. I have a bit of a mixed history when it comes to this film. I saw this also when I was young, although I saw it later after I saw the film Suspiria. And I remember when I was younger, I saw it on VHS, but the VHS was fairly difficult to come by. I remember it being something that I had to try to look for. It wasn't the easiest thing to find, but I did find it, and I did watch it. I did also, however, find the soundtrack of the film before I actually saw the film, and I was listening to the soundtrack, which was a bit of a mistake now that I think about it, because if some of you are familiar with the soundtrack, you'll know that there's one track which is titled Rose Gets It, I think, which is which basically gives away what happens to the character of Rose, played by Irene Miracle, what happens to her around the middle of the film. So it was a bit of a spoiler title to the song, which is a bit of a shame, but I guess what that did was, when I saw the film, after I had the knowledge about this music, and when I saw the film and when I saw Rose and she's walking around in the attic, remember, or somewhere in the apartment building, and that music comes on, you remember that kind of the soprano voice, the woman voice, and it's going, it's just her and the voice, and that's the track called Rose Gets It. When I heard that come up as I see Rose walking around by herself, I just got chills, because I knew, something bad is going to happen to Rose. And indeed, suddenly the music shifts gears and it does this really odd and creepy kind of flutes and orchestrated song, and then of course there's that thing with her and the window, which is quite a frightening thing, and the hands that reach behind her and grab her by the face, which is a very iconic image. So I remember just being freaked out when I first heard those first few notes of that soprano singer as Rose is walking through the apartment building. Really frightening. But I must say that this film is, unfortunately, it's not my favorite Argento so far. And let me just go through the negatives, if I can, really quickly first. I think the negatives are that the characterizations are made in a way that it's very difficult to identify with the characters. And there are a number of characters that I think we are meant to identify with, as you know. So there is Mark, and there is the sister Rose, and there is Mark's friend or girlfriend Sarah, who is in Rome. So Mark's in Rome, Sarah is in Rome, and then Rose is in New York. So it's tough because we first get introduced to Rose, and she finds the book and she starts the ball rolling in terms of the narrative, and she has that very famous scene where she's exploring and she suddenly goes underwater in this really ludicrous setup, which is beautiful and illogical at the same time. One of the most famous scenes in the film, of course. But then we go to Mark in Italy, in Rome, and then we go to Sarah, who is Mark's friend or girlfriend in Rome. And they are musicologists, or they're studying music. They're music students. And we suddenly expected to sympathize with Mark and with Sarah, which is, I think, a bit of a hard thing, because Mark is, I would say, he's a pretty bland character. He seems to be, doesn't react in a way that we would normally expect him to react. He seems to be a bit ineffectual. He faints a lot, or maybe he's under some spell, which makes him a bit ineffectual, especially around the middle of the film when he arrives in New York. It is only at the very end, maybe the last 10 or 15 minutes, when he is exploring and he discovers the secret of Mater Tenebrarum. But for the most part, he doesn't seem to be that active or proactive protagonist that is very easy to associate with and to sympathize with. He's no Marcus Daly from Deep Red. He is no Sarah, the Stefania Cassini character in Suspiria. So it's a little bit hard. He's no Sam Dalmas in Bird with the Crystal Plumage. So he doesn't. It's hard for us, or at least for me, to sympathize with him. And then we have Sarah, who is the girlfriend of Mark, but she seems to be here very briefly. She does a bit of discovery in the library in Rome, only to then be kind of very violently dispatched with a knife. It's quite a gruesome scene. So there is no more Sarah, and therefore we have no connection with that character anymore. And then we have Rose, but unfortunately Rose also gets it, as it were, in a very iconic death scene involving the window. Yet another example of a kind of a decapitation, or an attempted decapitation, in an Argento film. But then we have to associate with Mark and some other minor characters. So it's all this is my way of saying that it's very difficult for me to sympathize with a character at any given moment, because everything seems to be a bit of a red herring. I want to follow Rose, but then I'm disrupted halfway because I have to go to Rome and deal with Mark and Sarah, and then I go back to New York, but then she gets it. I want to deal with Mark, but he seems to be a bit ineffectual. I want to associate with Sarah, but then she gets it pretty early. So it's a very it's disorienting in a way, and perhaps that's on purpose because it's hard to get one's bearings when one watches Inferno, and maybe that's to some psychological effect in my mind that is to the benefit of the film. Another thing that is a bit of a weak point for me, and this is something that comes up in other Dario Argento films, it's the animal cruelty. We get all these things, these scenes involving cats, the murder of Elise, the Dario Nicolodi character, involving cats essentially being thrown at her. So we have these... And there's actually a moment when we actually see a hand throwing a cat at Dario Nicolodi. So obviously these cats were being treated rather inhumanely. I mean, unless you think throwing a cat is a humane way of dealing with an animal. But also there are shots of cats actually eating a mouse or something like that, and other things of that nature. So this is something that we see a lot in earlier Argento films. In Deep Red we had the needle that was stuck through the neck of a lizard, and it was a real lizard too. You could tell because you couldn't fake that. There's also, the maggots. Those are still living creatures as well. But in Suspiria, remember we had the shot of the feet walking across the floor that was covered with maggots. So it was obvious that they were actually stomping on real live maggots, which is, they're maggots. I granted, but I still think it's a bit of an unpleasant thing to see, feet actually stomping on maggots. So this is kind of a disturbing trend in Dario Argento films that I think reaches a bit of a summit here with Inferno. So this is unpleasant and unfortunate for me, and I don't think it's necessary for purposes of what the film is trying to convey. So I find this to be a bit of a negative thing, and it is a negative aspect in other films, but it seems to be particularly so in this film because we just see so much of it, and it's so much in my face. So I don't quite know how to process it in my mind in a way that would make me look at it in a positive light. But that's more or less what I think negatively of the film, but there are many positive elements to the film as well that I really admire. I admire its mood and its atmosphere. This is achieved quite nicely through the music, the Keith Emerson music. This is a score that is very different from the Goblin score in Suspiria. The Goblin score in Suspiria, it could be said that music was itself a character. It was its own ominous character. It was like a separate entity that was doing battle with the images on screen. Well, here in Inferno, Keith Emerson's score seems to be more integrated with the film. It seems to be part of the world. It doesn't seem to be antagonistic against the screen or its characters. It doesn't suggest its own evil entity presence, but rather it's there to set a mood and to set a tone and to set a pitch for the proceedings that are to occur on screen. And I think for the most part it succeeds. But also there are a lot of very clever set pieces for the murders, which I think is very interesting. I mentioned Rose with the window. I think that's one of the most frightening things. And that detail of the nail. Remember? Oh gosh. I'm sorry. There's the nail, and her head, the back of her neck is driven. And this reminds me of an early scene in the film Opera, the later film Opera, where we see someone being dealt with in a very similar way, involving, I think, a hook or something like that protruding out of a wall. So there seems to be some kind of a thematic link in terms of how Dario Argento dispatches with his victims in his filmic stories. So there's that death. There's also Sarah's death, which is, I think, for me, probably one of the scariest death scenes in an Argento film. It's very simple. It's just a knife in the back, essentially. But here we have the opera being played, and the power goes on and off, so it just blanks out and goes back on and blanks out, so you're already off guard. And then we have Carlo with the knife through his neck, and you've got the blood splatter, so you've got also this very down and dirty, almost animal-like kind of release of like fluid, which we see also in Deep Red, Helga Omen and the water, the spittle coming out of her mouth. It's very similar to that. And also, of course, that image of her body falling through, like ripping through this kind of silk screen, and the lights come up, and the shrill of the music, and then she falls, and then she's dead. And of course Mark is there. Mark, he reacts as Mark would, right? He just, stone-faced. But regardless of how Mark reacts, I think the effectiveness of the actual murder scene itself, it's without question. The plot of the film has a bit of an aimlessness that, I don't know, I think it's harder to defend than, let's say, the plot of Suspiria. The plot of Suspiria, if you think about it, the plot of Suspiria was pretty, it was pretty defendable from critics, I think, in the sense that there was a certain realism that was associated with that film. Because really what you have in that film is basically the antagonists just reacting and trying to protect themselves with respect to these students, and they're investigating, trying to figure out what's going on. So it's really just a story of survival regarding these witches, But here in Inferno, there doesn't seem to be that same sense of urgency. Everything seems to be pretty aimless or without any direct meaning. Characters emerge just for the sake of being killed off pretty soon afterwards. I mean, this is true for the Dario Argento character. This is true for, I'd say, the Sarah character. And there doesn't seem to be much purpose behind their deaths. Of course, there is a direct narrative reason, namely that they have discovered this book called The Three Mothers by Varelli, which reveals the secrets of the three mothers, and therefore anyone who knows the secrets therefore must be killed or dispatched, gotten rid of. But that obviously leads to the question, well, if this book was so dangerous, why didn't people destroy copies of the book, I mean, I think it would have been pretty easy to track down. And Mater Tenebrarum is, we assume, is one of the most powerful witches in the world. So I'm sure she would have the power to conjure up some kind of ability to track down these books if they were so dangerous. So there's all these leaps of logic that are necessary in order to fully defend the work in terms of a narrative cohesive plot. But ultimately, I think it's really easy to defend it not on those terms, but rather on the terms of it being dream logic. So we can use the defense of this operating on dream logic, and I'm not sure how fully successful that defense would be. I think it's successful to a certain degree, but then it falls flat because ultimately we do need something other than dream logic to hang our hat on, so to speak. And if we're not going to get it from a fully, how should I put it, from a well thought out narrative, we should get it from the characters. And as I explained earlier, I think it's hard for me to connect with the characters in a way that I think would make the film a little bit more of a successful view in my eyes. This is all still to say that I think dream logic is a fairly successful way to defend this film and to support this film. And then it leads us to the end of the film, obviously, with the revelation of Mater Tenebrarum. I'm not quite sure what her plan was. Was she trying to convert Mark? Because she says something about there are some steps that need to be taken before he is changed. So I don't know what she means by that. Is she just trying to kill him, or is she trying to transform him into some kind of other ethereal being or something? I'm not quite sure, and I don't think we're meant to care or to think too much about it, because it is the climax of the film. And while these details, I think, linger in the mind and are a little bit baffling, I think the overall effect of Mater Tenebrarum turning into this huge skull figure with a black cloak and fire all around her and things falling, and then she disappears in the flames as she screams, I think it's a very effective one. Again, don't think too hard about it, but just let the image take you, or let the scene take you, the environment take you, and I think it becomes a very successful venture as a film viewing experience. Speaking of Mater Tenebrarum, of course, this is the film that I think goes into great detail about the three mothers. This is supposed to be a sequel of sorts to Suspiria, because Suspiria, which is mentioned here in this film, in the sense that we are told that there are three witches, Mater Suspiriorum, Mater Lacrimarum, and Mater Tenebrarum, and they live in three different places in the world. So Mater Suspiriorum lives in Freiburg, Germany, which is of course Suspiria. Then we have Mater Lacrimarum, who lives in Rome, and of course in this film Inferno we do see a glimpse of a woman who we assume is Mater Lacrimarum, with that cat, and she does her thing looking at Mark in the classroom. And then the third mother, the Mater Tenebrarum, who is we assume to be the witch here in New York. So we get this mythology of the three mothers, which we didn't get in detail in Suspiria. Suspiria never talked about any of the other three mothers, or didn't talk about Tenebrarum or Three Houses or Verelli, anything like that. It just talked about the witch's coven. So in a sense, it feels, at least to me, like this whole three mothers mythology is sort of kind of retroactively being applied to Suspiria, or in other words, it's fully being introduced for the first time here in Inferno after the fact of Suspiria. So, that's a good thing, but at the same time, I don't know, how should I put it? It's one way, I suppose, of creating, what's a way of putting it, a cinematic universe, so to speak, and therefore we are left with the expectation then of, well, what about the third mother? What about Mater Lacrimarum? So this is Inferno. I'm sorry if I'm not more enthusiastic about the film. I try to be as enthusiastic about films as I can, but as I say, it's not a masterpiece. It is not a failure, but it is certainly not Argento's best. We will talk about a film that I think arguably can be described as being Argento's best, or at least one of his best, next time, which is the film Tenebrae. Until then, my friends, I hope you are well, and I hope you're having a great Halloween and you're watching a lot of great scary movies. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Cheers.